Oh, hello and welcome to another episode of CRT Sound System. And we've got episode 75, and we're talking about Touhou again, or Touhou. I'm never sure how to pronounce it, and I probably never will be in my entire life. Reese isn't with us this week, so we just have Thuly as a guest. Thuly, how are you?
I'm doing very well.
Um, so yeah, previously we've had a friend of you and I, Justice, on to talk about two games, but you wanted to talk about these when we were discussing an episode this morning or this earlier. Why specifically these three games? I guess is the first question. So we're talking about 6, 7, and 8 of the
Yeah,
two series.
yeah. Touhou, go nuts. Number two, HU. It all works. Yeah, these three games in particular. For for a selfish reason, the seventh game in the series is the first one I played, and got way deep into it, and it was my comfort game for some time, and then it also just seemed like the next logical place to talk about the series, given that the block of games following this one are what were talked about in the previous episode. So covering the start of the Windows era into where we'd been before just seemed like the right steps, because after this it gets into more Touhou music, as in like it is what's the word I'm looking for? More extravagant, more elaborate, newer sound hardware. But
Okay.
this is still the same gear he was using in the other games, but also during a transitional period. So to run this back, the games we're talking about are the 6th, 7th, and 8th Touhous, which are Touhou 6 was the first one for Windows PCs. The original chunk of the series had been PC 98, and that opening track was an unused song from the 5th Touhou game that was later released in a soundtrack compilation that was then reused and re-recorded as the main theme of the 6th game, which then stuck as the main theme of the series.
Oh, okay. I see. So it just sort of kept coming back then after that.
Yes, it does. And
Yeah.
that pentatonic riff is all throughout the soundtracks to these games, more or less in some games than others. But the opening screen of basically any Touhou game, like all the mainline ones, a lot of fan games, the fighting games, it's generally going to show up in the intro screen, or select, like stage select or character select screen, all that stuff.
Oh,
Like,
I see.
yeah.
Yeah, it definitely did sound familiar, but I wasn't too sure why. So yeah, that makes sense, because I've almost certainly heard it while playing IAMP. Um,
Yes.
um, I mentioned in the previous episode that the fighting games are pretty much the only ones that I have any major experience with. Just for whatever reason, I got really into IAMP for a while, back about 10 years ago, actually more than 10 years ago, about 15 years ago. Jesus Christ. Time time is a motherfucker.
Yeah, it keeps happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So the this one here, the sixth game, Embodiment of Scarlet Devil. So that's the first of the series um to be on. I suppose is the first to be made for PC, because I presume the other ones came. The older ones have been released on PC at some point.
So for 1 through 5, there's not a port.
Oh,
PC
okay.
98
So they're imported.
emulation is very good, and
Yeah.
so it's very straightforward to play those games, but there's no way to buy them, and there's no official Windows release.
Oh, okay. I see. So these then would be this would be the first of the series then that you'd be able to actually find on a Windows PC,
Absolutely.
like
And
natively.
yes, and this
Yeah.
is a real inflection point for the series, because it's a starting with Touhou 6 is more or less a lore reboot. of the entire series up to this point.
Yeah.
So taking the older games are interesting to go back and play, especially, you know, given the history of the series. Like the first game, you know, it was made in like 1992, and it was distributed by Zune at Comiket at a personal booth, and there was like 30 burned CDs or something that he happened to have, like that he had made himself. And so he gained some traction, and it was after this Windows release. I mean, there was already a Touhou fandom prior to this, but this is also when the Touhou industrial complex really popped off. Was in the in the aftermath of this. So yeah, the I guess a little bit of lore primer. Apologies for those of you that have already done the reading, aka the previous episode. This is set in a fantasy world that is anchored to a specific shrine that is in the real world. They're this little bubble dimension where forgotten myths go to live. It's a real Alice in Wonderland kind of situation. So if you use that as a touch point, or it's your granddaddy's fairy tale, but it's twisted. That's also kind of what it's doing. Nearly every game in the series is based on some piece of folklore or another that has been maybe tangentially remade. This one here, there's not so Embodiment of Scarlet Devil. It's about vampires.
Okay.
Yeah. How would I describe this? Just imagine an Always Sunny title card, the one about vampires, and that is the vibe of Touhou. It is as lofty as some of the stuff sounds. If you can one sentence yourself into an Always Sunny title card, you've pretty much got the vibe of the game. This is not a world of common sense. It is not a world where causality really... I mean, things happen because other things happen, but everything tends to naturally return to a status quo.
Oh, okay.
In fact, that's a big part of the lore here, is that... There's
sort of an episodic logic to it, yeah.
Absolutely there is. More characters get added over time just because that's what it do. But really, it's no different than a Mega Man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I know people talk about Touhou has 7,000 characters, and that's true, but the majority of them are around long enough to be a boss fight in one game, and then maybe get sidelong references in a fan comic or some novel or something. Yeah. So realistically, the core cast is significantly smaller than maybe some of the fandom would lead to believe. So about that core cast, this game features a total of 2 playable characters. They are Reimu, who is the shrine maiden of the shrine that links this world and this fantasy world to the real world. It's not exactly thriving, but at least it's well upkept in the fantasy world. In the real world, it is dilapidated and nobody goes there. That's all there is to it. This really is part of the philosophical underpinnings of Touhou is that because this is a place where myths that are forgotten wind up, the idea is that it's sort of a place for yokai to just do what yokai do without having to persist in a modern world of
sort of just like a halfway house for demons and shit.
Kind of, yes. It's not exactly a home for infinite loser situation, but but it is I guess everyone forgot about me, so I have to go be in. There's a place I can go.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And the conceit of Embodiment of Scarlet Devil here is that there is occasionally a weakening in the barrier between the real world and this fantasy realm, Gensokyo. Some vampires came in. Some Dracula-ass vampires got in during one of those weekends. It caused a big mess, and this is the aftermath of that. My thoughts are not particularly ordered here. I apologize to anyone listening. In the aftermath of that vampire incident is when the rules for fighting were rewritten. So Gensokyo is not a huge place, and it's as big as it needs to be for the story. But there's a small human village, and those humans know for a fact and believe in the yokai because they see and interact with them regularly, which means they get to keep being yokai, because if they get forgotten here, there's nowhere else to go. And in one of the things that yokai do often is kill people, which is a problem because they don't repopulate here quickly at all, because there is one small human village. Yeah, so the vampires came in, a bunch of violence happened. Again, this is all off screen prior to the events of these games. And so there was basically an accord reached between the yokai, including the vampires, and the humans. Well, a contingent of humans that knew the truth about what was going on here, because most humans, they need to be afraid, because that's how yokai get to keep being. And so they came up with this. It's a contrived way of making sense of why everything looks like, as Charlie Brooker once put it, a fireworks display getting sick. And so
Charlie Brooker covered these on Games Wipe.
There was a cutaway joke in a rant where one of these games was on screen for like a second and a half, and that's the phrase that he used to describe it. But yes, it was from a Games Wipe.
That's funny.
So, in essence, these fights are a dance-off, and that's the justification for why they're a bullet hell shooter with all kinds of multicolored bullets. The fact that everything is a little girl, is an anime girl, man, I don't know. That's just what he does.
Yeah,
that's just what the man do.
Accept that as part of the
Yeah, I mean, I again, likening it to Mega Man, any and everything in Mega Man is a robot. Like, you've got robot trees. Just in this, any and everything is some kind of spirit that has been personified into an implement of Japanese soft power. But I don't want to get into all that right now.
Yeah.
So the inciting incident for this game here, number 6, is the vampire, like, a scarlet mist descends upon the world. It starts spreading out. It's blocking out the sun. It's getting cold. It's messing with the weather, and our protag is responsible for. Okay, so Reimu is a cop, and I want to make that abundantly clear from the jump here. Her entire job is, whenever somebody is screwing around, it's her job to go tell them to knock it off. And in doing so, it maintains the status quo, and then life gets to go on like it always has for everyone here. But yeah, so Reimu she's a holdover character from, she was the protag of the PC98 series. She got a visual redesign going into the Windows era. She went from purple hair to black hair. The clothing got a bit of a redesign. There's another prominent character also from the PC98 series named Marissa, who, if you've ever seen the Touhou that just looks like a Final Fantasy Black Mage, that's her.
Yeah.
And they are the dual protags of the series.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're both in here. Multiple shot types for each. And the mystery unfolds that, well, okay, turns out it's coming from the castle. And you fight your way into the castle. A bunch of nonsense ensues as you beat up. Every Touhou game usually starts out with you beating up somebody who probably doesn't have anything to do with what's actually going on, because the plots of these,
but you have to start somewhere.
Exactly, you've got to start somewhere. And so the plots of these games are generally a series of 3 bosses that are getting shaken down for information, and then 3 bosses that are part of whatever incident is going on. And it's rarely nefarious. In this case, the vampires are spreading this red mist simply because they want to be able to walk outside without it hurting, and they're sick of using parasols. And that's reason enough to go full vampire magic, turn it Dracula Night, and do the thing. This one, so this game, the music in this one, it's in a very transitional state. The game itself is in a very transitional state. It's very bare bones as a series of systems. This one does not have a gimmick to speak of. It is a very straightforward bullet hell shmup.
Yeah.
And the because interestingly, because this one does have more explicitly Western theming, with it being Western vampires in a Western castle, there's a little bit of influence in that in the music as well. It's a little Castlevania-y in places. It does. I mean, it's still Touhou music, but there's a little bit where it's like, damn, that kind of sounds like a Harmony of Dissonance track. But yeah,
that's a good, yeah. And does he was like, even though he's moved on to PC, is he still composing on the PC 98 hardware, or is he sort of?
He is using, and somebody I know could correct me on this, and probably will. But to my knowledge, he is using the exact same MIDI stack that he was using during the PC 98 era at this point.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay.
And
so there's not a massive difference in the sound between these and the previous ones.
So because the synthesis engine is different from Windows to PC 98, the sounds themselves are different, but compositionally there's a bit of a shift. But the PC 98 stuff is a whole other beast music-wise, because it had fewer channels, and using the song that we started with as an example, you'll just hear there's a lot more layers to these games than the previous ones. And he wasn't sure what to do with them at first, and then around the 8th game is when he said, "Oh, I can just put arpeggios everywhere."
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I reckon we'll jump into the first block of tracks anyway, because we've actually got quite a bit of music to get through for this one. So, so the tracks I downloaded all seem to have different names to the ones you gave me. So I'm just going to go with the names you gave me on this. That's an artifact of the way he writes the song titles. They have a given Japanese name and then a given English name. And then there's also a translation of the Japanese name to English, because they don't always line up 1-to-1. They don't match up 1-to-1. Yeah, that makes sense.
Some of them could be completely different. Some of them are very similar.
Yeah, it wasn't difficult to figure out which ones were which ones. Yeah, they're just it's obviously just sometimes there was just like an object subject verb sort of swapped around somewhere. But other than that was more or less the same. Yeah. From 206, we have Scarlet Beyond the Crimson Dream, A Soul as Red as a Ground Cherry, Cerno's Theme, Beloved Tomboyish Girl, Shanghai Teahouse / Chinese Tea, The Maid in the Pocket Watch of Blood, which is an amazing song title.
Yes, it is.
Then Sakuya Izayoi's Theme, Lunar Clock, Lunar Dial, Remedia Scarlet's Theme, Septette for the Dead Princess, and Flander. Is it Flander?
I think it's Flandre. There's kind of a French thing going on with all the vampires here, so I believe it's Flandra.
So Flandra Scarlet's Theme, which is UN Owen Was Her, and I have no idea what that means.
It's absolute nonsense.
Okay, it is nonsense. That's fine. lot of very cool shit in there. Yeah, we're talking a lot about just the Castlevania style of some of these, but like, yeah, these he really loves an arpeggio. That's the one thing that I keep coming to me, and those trumpet samples. Like every time I hear that trumpet, I'm like, that's a Touhou trumpet.
Yeah, that Touhou trumpet is unmistakable. So yeah, that's Touhou 6. The game is fairly bare bones as a video game. It's the formula that the series followed pretty much since then, that most shooting games do. If you've got 6 stages, the game ends at 5 if you're playing on easy, and you don't get to see the ending. And then there's an extra stage after you've beaten the game 1cc that you can play independently. That is on its own difficulty tier, somewhere around hard. Because the core game on the highest difficulty is generally harder than your extra stage.
Yeah.
But the extra stage is a 7th boss that's kind of on the same curve as a normal difficulty playthrough. But thankfully, you don't have to make it all the way through the 6 stages. You get to go straight to the 7th stage. And so that's the way the series has been for the most part since then. In Touhou 7, that was played with a little bit. There are 2 extra stages. There's a stage 7, and then after you beat stage 7, there's a stage 8.
Okay.
And this is, by Touhou 7, the game mechanically has found more of its footing. There's a lot of little quality of life improvements. The game it plays better in general. It just feels a little bit better to move around. The verbs just feel a little bit better. There's a 3rd playable character who is a returning character from Touhou 6, the time-stopping maid, Sakuya, who's the one that had the the Luna Dial track that we listened to earlier.
Yeah. That was one I really liked a lot, yeah.
It's a cool song.
Yeah. It's like the change of the time signatures and like the interesting instruments, but yeah.
He snuck in a harpsichord and yeah.
So as far as the lore goes for these, is it very present in the games themselves, or is it stuff that's sort of like in the manuals and wikis that you have to dig into it to actually find out all these character relationships and story things?
Yeah, so the deep lore, if you want to call it that, is all in manuals and in there are official lore books that are released that provide context, that are written. It'll be written from one character or another's perspective. And having, more than anything, the characterization of these individual characters is pulled from those books. Because the way somebody observes something or talks about a specific event can actually inform you a lot about the personality of the character as Zune presents them. The mimetic stuff going on with Touhou. So,
yeah,
the iceberg, I guess. Basically, Touhou memes become incomprehensible immediately once you get past the surface level of, oh, hey, yeah, I like that one with the red bow. Or, oh, hey, yeah, it's that one with the black dress that carries a scythe around or something. And it's just saying something funny. And then it immediately turns into a psychotic otaku pile of the things that people do with anime on the internet. And
yeah, I suppose it's sort of interesting to me with Touhou in particular, just because it's sort of, by its nature of being Daojin, is like the community shapes it regardless of, like, you know, I realize that Jun or whatever his name is like, he's the main guy, but I feel like he can't. He doesn't have complete ownership over it because of the way that it is, you know. And like, I'm always curious about like how he sort of reconciles that in his own sort of stories. Like, does he tend to bring in community stuff and unofficial like stuff that he hasn't done very often, or does he just sort of silo that off as being like, this is separate to what I'm doing. Like, what's his philosophy in that regard?
Yeah, so I am not super deep in the fan community anymore.
Okay.
Historically, he has tried fairly hard to, with each game, come up with an independent story and try to not lead into mimetic stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things that he really seems to like to do is he just really likes creating new characters. And people, characters will show up. Like I said, like the 2 pro tags are holdovers from the PC-98 series. In Touhou 7 coming up, there is another returning character from the PC-98 series named Alice, who was
Alice, yeah.
She was a boss.
Yeah.
And this is the first time she appears. To put a finer point on the nature of this world, the character is based on an anime series that is highly inspired by Alice in Wonderland. So it's Alice in Wonderland by 1 degree of separation.
Yeah.
And that character fits perfectly right in here. And understanding that Touhou is ultimately nonsense that returns to a status quo, I think is eminently important to understanding what kind of the project is here, because it's, if I can disappear at my own butt for a little bit, it is this weird extension of the storytelling in Touhou is a weird extension of like an oral historical tradition.
Okay.
In that Zune is taking some fairy tale or element of history and taking the core idea of it or a core concept from it and then going off on some completely wild tangent. Touhou 7 in particular is one of those. So forgive me, history brain is kicking in here. The core conceit of Touhou 7 and the incident itself. Okay, so here's your Always Sunny card. Winter won't end, and it's a ghost's fault.
Okay.
The incident going on is winter has not ended. Spring is here, but it's still cold, and it's snowing, and it still sucks. And through a series of shaking down people to figure out information and getting to the root of it, no pun intended, it turns out that there is there's a demon tree. I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, this is it. Listen, if somebody can handle SMT, I'm sure this will be fine.
Yeah.
There's a demon tree, and it doesn't bloom in spring. And there is a ghost that lives at and around that demon tree named Yuyuko. She's the final boss of the game, who is fascinated by the fact that it won't bloom. And so she's like, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use some magic, and I'm going to take all the spring, and I'm going to put it into this tree, and I'm going to make it bloom. And that's the whole story, more or less, as it's presented in game. And then protag Reimu, Marissa, or Sakia, whoever you're playing as, rolls up and says, "Hey, knock that off." And then you shoot her a bunch of times, and then she says, "Okay." That's more or less it. However, it's derived from a famous, from a well-known poem that was written in around 900 AD by a Buddhist monk named Saigyo. Worth mentioning, the final boss's last name is Saigyoji, so it's a straight reference to him.
Yeah.
And one of his best known poems is about talking about, when it's time for me to die, I would really prefer it be on an early spring evening under a full moon under one of these beautiful trees. And so Zune took that, riffed on it, and so now you've got this demon tree that calls people to come kill themselves so the roots can drink the blood. And Also, and I'm not making this up, the ghost that's the final boss, her mortal body is one of the bodies in the roots of that tree.
Oh, okay.
And is the one, and her mortal body is the one that is keeping it from blooming because reasons, magic, doesn't matter.
Oh, I see.
And the ghost, if she manages to do it, will, she doesn't realize she's doing this, will unintentionally resurrect herself, and the tree will then be able to go ape shit again.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that's, but the thing is, all of the darker parts of that exist only in lore references outside of, I mean, you can kind of piece some of it together, but it's all presented in a very lighthearted manner because these are people that know that what they're fighting for is not life and death and like between themselves, because of the fact that, hey, we don't kill each other anymore, because if we do, it'll upset the balance and then this whole place disappears and then there's no people or yokai.
Yeah.
And so there's the lore stuff it all comes off as very high stakes, but the moment to moment, the day to day for these people is not. And that's one of the charms of Touhou, is that even though people are doing insane world shattering things, they're just kind of flip with each other and don't really care. Like, they do care, but like in the sense that it's like, yeah, I mean, we're going to do this thing and then, whoever wins, and I'm entitled to a rematch if I lose, which is how they justify just restarting the game internally.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's sort of one of the jokes I often see about like Touhou lore is like, like the games themselves are sort of on the surface quite sort of sort of pleasant, but then once you actually dig down into the actual lore and what is going on in each of them, there's a lot more darkness to them. Like the one that I forget which one Justice was talking about, but it's all about nukes essentially. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Gensokyo's nuclear program was my Discord username for a long time, so take that for what it's worth.
Yeah. Which is just kind of a wild, but I guess that sort of gives him, especially if he's sort of resetting it after each one, he can sort of play around with the lore and play around with the world in a way that he wouldn't be able to do if he was sort of trying to really keep everything in a strict timeline or trying to follow, make sure that he's following all the lore Bibles exactly to the letter and everything like that.
Yes. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because in 7, there's a character introduced named Yukari. And she is presented as extremely powerful and extremely knowledgeable. She's some kind of yokai. She can cross the barrier that divides the real world and this fantasy world, which is fairly unique, especially given that main protag's job is, her power is creating barriers, including the big one.
Oh, okay.
So they know each other, and there's kind of a running relationship between the two of them. Not necessarily as antagonistic, but it's like, well, we kind of do the same thing, even though we're not always on the same page. And that character is the final boss. She's the boss of the extra stage, the extra stage.
Oh, the second one, yeah.
The second one, and seems to have, the way it's portrayed is that she knew what was happening all along, was kind of manipulating things to make sure the ghost accidentally resurrecting itself didn't happen.
See,
this soundtrack also, particularly the final boss theme, quotes a folk song about cherry trees, and that's something that I think kind of gets lost, not for all Western players, but if you don't know Like, because there's a ton of them that I don't catch, but there's a ton of quotes of various folk songs and things throughout the Touhou soundtracks.
Okay, interesting.
And so it's the same. It's that oral tradition sentiment, man. I keep coming back to that, and sorry, I'm kind of tripping over my own words here. It's just my thesis is that this is an incredibly specific and strange storytelling mechanism. This whole series, that's all it is. Like, specifically storytelling in the tradition of campfire storytelling.
Yeah. And I suppose in sort of like in how it resets, that it's, you know, it's like a different retelling each time, or like, you know, because obviously the basic structure of the games will remain the same, because, you know, they're all, you say, your 5 stages plus a bonus stage. You know, so like, yeah, I suppose it is sort of like a fireside tale being retold in different ways with different embellishments.
In a very modern way. Because I mean, to go back to the nuclear one you were mentioning, there is very much like the folktale about the crow that ate the sun is very real. I couldn't tell you all the details off the top of my head, but that's a real folktale that gets sold in Japan. But to take that and to run with it to, well, if you eat the sun, that's a nuclear reactor in space. Yeah. So like that's the kind of stuff he consistently does with these stories.
Yeah.
And they're not all that fantastic, but some of them get weird. But yeah, let's go ahead and run the tracks. And I've got a little bit more to say about 7 once we listen to the music. And
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So from 207, we have The Fantastic Legend of Tono, Alice Margatroyd's Team, Doll Judgment, The Girl Who Played with People's Shapes, The Capital City of Flowers in the Sky, Prim's River Sisters Theme, Phantom Ensemble, then Yuyuko Sayugi's Theme, Bloom Nobly, Cherry Blossoms of Sumizome, Border of Life, and then another track just called Border of Life, and then Yukari Yakumo's Theme, Necrofantasia. Right, yeah. Yeah, I think the one thing that jumped out at me right away, just in terms of the difference between that and the previous game, was just the sort of the more rich arrangements. It's clearly using a lot of the same hardware, a lot of the same synths and samples are showing up. But there's a lot more tracks to it. You get like some nice synth pads going. Yeah, and it's just like I'd say those arrangements are just a lot richer.
There's a lot more fullness in that, and that's kind of indicative of the whole package of the game. There's a ton of quality of life stuff, like I said. The biggest ones are there's a visible hitbox indicator when you're in focus, which is moving slowly, which was not present in the 6th game, as well as there is an indicator at the bottom of the screen for the boss's location, so that you don't have to look. If you're looking at your character at the bottom of the screen, you're able to see where the boss is without having to look up. That's
very handy, yeah. Because then you can sort of focus on the bullet patterns and not...
Exactly. You can focus in the sphere around your character as opposed to having to glance up. The life bars are still up there, but past a point, you're not looking at the life bars anymore. You were just performing until you finish.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
7 also... so I think you and Justice talked about this. Every Touhou has a gimmick.
Yeah.
A scoring gimmick or a special attack gimmick or something along those lines. So Touhou 6 did not. It was just straightforward. 7...
Well, you mentioned it was sort of rebooting the series, so it's probably just easier to have it be as straightforward a shooter as possible.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and Zun's on record saying that a lot of the development time for Touhou 6 and some of the reasons that it feels sort of rough is that, number one, it was his first time working in Windows, but also that he spent most of the dev time actually building the tools to make this engine. And so 6, 7, 8, and 9 all run on the same engine, and he built a new engine for 10 forwards.
Oh, okay.
So this is this engine's era, and they feel very similar as a player. The verbs are all more or less the same, but there's some graphical stuff, especially that this engine could not do that the later games do, without a doubt.
Fair enough.
So yeah, Touhou 7's gimmick was a pink pickup that were cherry blossoms. So you recapture bits of spring, and whenever you reach a threshold, you get a barrier. A pink magic circle appears around your character, and it slowly times out. If you get hit, it shatters the barrier, but you don't take a hit, which is great. Or you can pop it early, like a bomb, which breaks the barrier but clears the screen. Or if you time it out, you score based on it. Basically acts as a multiplier for stuff picked up during the barrier time.
While it was active. Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting sort of giving the player that sort of the choice to either try and increase the score or let's say tank an extra hit or just
Well, and also it was added as a direct response to a common criticism of 6, which is 6 is actually pretty hard for a Touhou game. It's not a Goang or something, but it's not it is not nearly as inviting as 7 and the later games. It's pretty brutal. And so having a tool that allows you to just tank extra hits, like 1-ups within 1-ups, is just really nice. That's all there is to it.
Yeah. In a game where you can only get hit once, obviously being able to take a second hit is obviously doubling your lifespan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it lets you get through some real garbage.
Yeah, and especially as you mentioned, it now has that sort of focus mode where you can see your hitbox better. Which is obviously going to make your life easier. It is something Justice mentioned as well in the previous episode, but like these games have much more of a reputation for being hard than they are actually hard. Even compared to like a cave shooter or a lot of the harder like Gradius games and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah. These are the kind of games that they very strongly reward memorization, and that's just all there is to it. And whether or not that's something that somebody wants to put into a game, like I understand. And the gameplay of it is not necessarily going to appeal to somebody who's a Dark Souls player, for example. But Dark Souls is another game with that same mentality where it rewards memorization and learning how to engage with each barrier that's placed in front of you.
Yeah.
Any shooting type game is like that, where eventually you learn the moves, you do the dance, and you win the game.
Yeah. You do all the moves along with the VHS of Chronicles of Riddick and
open palm slam it.
Yeah, because like any game, I hate to defend the quote unquote get good mentality, but like I do think that like that is sometimes you do just have to learn a game, and that's not a question of like being good at games or bad at games or whatever, but just like through repetition, through just putting in the time into a game, you learn what it wants you to do to beat it.
I think there is a non-toxic there is a non-toxic version of get good, which is practice and mentorship.
Yeah. Because that's how I got good at playing these games. Playing like I'm not great at these. I've only done one credit clear of Mushihime-sama. That's my only ever one that I've ever done.
Damn though.
But again, like put in the time to it because it was one of the ones that I got on the Xbox 360 because I was able to import it. And I think it was in one of the easier modes as well. It wasn't like Black Label or anything like that. God no. But like again, like I put in the time and like I learned the patterns. I found the sort of the parts of the stages that were really really tough for me, and sort of I spoke to a couple of people who knew more about the game than me, and sort of they sort of coached me through it, and again like that, there's the get good can get you so far in terms of like if you're willing to put in the work, and you just learn what the game actually teaches you, because every game of this type sort of teaches you how to beat it, as long as you're willing to learn. And whether that's just like being better at sort of reacting to stuff, or whether it's just like grinding out the encounters so that you know them off by heart. It's like that is just how you play these games sometimes, and that's fine. There's nothing, there's nothing toxic about that. It's really only just sort of when people start to turn that around into like you just have to be good at games.
Yeah, scoreboard elitism.
I'm not that good at games.
Scoreboard elitism, especially for single player games, is unless you're getting paid to speedrun things, I don't understand it. I mean, and I say this as a person who is competitive. Like, I get salty when I play competitive player versus player games. Like, I sit down to fighting games, like you Mars me in Sailor Moon S, and I'm gonna be salty about it.
Yeah.
But it does,
like fighting games are a great example of that, as well as like one of the best ways to get good at fighting games is to just grind out and count like against people who are better than you, and ask them what you did wrong when you fucking lose.
Yes.
And then and not just ask them what you did wrong, but listen to them when they tell you what you did wrong. When they say stop jumping in, if you just if you just go, well, I'm just going to keep jumping in, then you're not going to learn anything.
Yes, there's a certain kind of ego death that is required to actually get good.
Yeah. So
go
ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of ego death. Touhou 7, it feels significantly more whole than 6. And 8 is that jump again. So the 8th Touhou game, English name Imperishable Night, Touhou Ieyasu, is by my metrics this is a game that if I had bought on a console for $60, I would have been more than pleased. So Touhou 8 is the last in this trilogy of games. Prior to the new engine, the fighting game came out around the same time as this. The Immaterial Missing Power, the first fighting game, which we talked a little bit during the music.
Yeah.
And so there's been a little bit of fleshing out of the characterization of the characters. There's been some lore stuff that's happened at this point because the lore reset has gotten to a place where it's actually built up, and there's some fanon and there's some canon and some stuff has happened. And Touhou 8 is presented as it is still some mystic nonsense, but it's a kind of a bigger deal. Not that it doesn't reset to status quo at the end, but the game itself. So this is the first game in the series, and I haven't played the most recent couple, but to my knowledge, the only one that has branching paths.
Oh, okay.
Not specifically for stages, kind of for the final stage. But depending on who you're playing as determines who the boss of stage 4 is. And then your performance engaging with the gimmick will decide which final boss you face at the end. If it's final boss A or the real final boss.
Oh, okay. So does that mean there's no bonus stage with the real final boss, or?
There is still a bonus stage.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, there's still a bonus stage. So this one is based on the Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, which is the Princess Kaguya story, the moon princess that goes back to the moon and makes everyone sad, that has been referenced, that is like the foundational text for Sailor Moon. It is sent up at the end of the first season of Avatar. Studio Ghibli straight made a Princess Kaguya movie. Like it is a piece of literature that has been talked about time and time again, and it's the oldest surviving intact epic poem in the Japanese literature canon. Okay, so it's a pretty revered text. It's kind of like, I'm not going to say it's their own Epic of Gilgamesh, but it's sort of the same concept. Though it's from
that space in
it's from
culture.
Much later. Yeah, it's from much later. Though it is. What's important about it is it is like the oldest natively Japanese text. They have older legends from China, but this is the one that is specifically Japanese.
Okay, interesting. It has a lot more characters, it looks like, as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of Touhous in this one.
Many waifus.
Many. So in Zun's interpretation of the story of Kaguya, which is it's a orphan is found in the forest, raised, becomes a princess, asks people to do impossible things, then finds out she is from the moon and has to go back, and then goes back and makes a bunch of people sad. The version of Kaguya in this one is I hate to call it a refugee specifically, but more like an exile for her own safety.
Oh, okay.
From the moon. So she's an immortal that was gifted immortality through scientific means by... Let me back that up. So Kaguya is the true final boss.
Yeah.
She was gifted immortality by the other final boss.
Okay.
Them and their rabbit, a couple rabbits live on the moon. That's all there is to know about that. Them and a couple of their rabbit friends from the moon. Turns out they pissed off a lot of people by doing that. And so they just went and hit on Earth and are stowed up in a castle made of bamboo in the middle of an impenetrable bamboo forest. That also happens to have a transplanar connection to the moon.
Right.
Moon, the people on the moon are going to invade Earth, or there's going to be some kind of retaliatory action against the Earth. And one of the rabbit people gets a psychic message that, yo, there's a draft, get yourselves up here. We need to go to war. And everyone on all of this group on Earth says, no, I don't want to do that. That sounds bad. That's dumb. And so they steal the moon magically somehow and put a fake moon up there.
Interesting.
Yes. I'm kind of running this backwards from the lore here. So from the perspective of main characters, it's Harvest Festival time, and the moon is wrong, and that's bad. So again,
gotta have the moon for your Harvest Festival.
Exactly. And so your title card on this one is somebody stole the moon and we're going to stop time so it doesn't mess up the night of the county fair.
I guess that's why it's the imperishable night, because it doesn't end or whatever.
Exactly.
Well, okay, that's interesting.
So this one features playable characters. I'm going to say it features 4 playable characters, but a big ol' asterisk on that. In this one, each of the playable characters is a returning character from one of the previous games. So you've got Reimu, you've got Marissa, it's your normal protags. You've got Sakuya, and then you have a character named Yomu, who is the bodyguard of the ghost lady from the final boss of the previous game.
Oh, okay.
And then each of those characters, whenever you focus, has a partner that you switch to.
Oh, okay.
So you actually, whenever you focus, you actually switch characters. Yeah, for Reimu, it's the extra boss of the previous game, Yukari. For Marissa, it's Alice. For Sakuya, it's Ramelia. And for Yomu, it's Yuyuko, the final boss of the previous game. So it's everyone is here. And then after you clear the game, you're able to play as characters individually.
Okay, interesting. So they're fixed. You don't pick both characters when you start off. You just pick your main character.
You pick your team.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You pick a fixed team.
Interesting.
And then the gimmick, it's another pickup gimmick because they're mostly pickup gimmicks. And the idea is that you need to pick up enough of what they call time orbs, because in between stages, there's a clock running, and the time orbs let you slow down time. And so you basically have to get X number of these time orb point items and get to the final stage before sunrise to hit to get the true final boss.
Okay, so how much time you have left determines which boss you reach.
Correct. Notably, this game also, when you continue, it's not an immediate no 1cc, don't see the final boss. It costs time.
Right, so you can still, in theory, still see the final boss if you.
If you play otherwise perfectly, it is theoretically possible to see TFB even on a 2cc clear, but
interesting. Okay, that's cool.
It's not easy. It would be weird. Somebody playing at the level that they would need to
is not
make that happen is not likely to die. Exactly. One of the other things this game added, so that's a lot of content for what this game is. It also has an extra stage with its own boss. There's some lore there. It's another immortal. They kill each other. The two immortals, Kaguya and this other one, it's a Phoenix person, kill each other for fun because it turns out immortality is boring.
I bet.
It also has an extensive practice mode where you can go in and play all of the spell cards or patterns in the game. So each individual boss pattern on every difficulty. And inside of that practice mode, it has a bunch of extra attacks for bosses that don't appear in the normal game. So there's a ton of content. Like, this is Perfect Cherry Blossom, or not Perfect Cherry Blossom, Imperishable Night as a total, like, it feels like a jam-packed console release. More so than any of the other games. Just tons of characters, tons of content. It also, it just having the branching paths. And one of the notable things is because of the way the story plays out, the moon getting weird is kind of making people go a little crazy. The fourth stage boss is, depending on who you're playing as, is other protag. Notably, there is if you're playing as Marissa, you will fight Reimu, and if you're playing as Reimu, you will fight Marissa.
Oh, okay. So they're just paired.
Yeah, and then it's the same way with the other two. I think Remelia fights. I think Saki and Remelia fight Reimu, and Yuyuko fights Marissa. I don't remember off the top of my head. Forgive me.
Yeah.
But what matters is that this is the first time that the themes for the protag characters have shown up in a game, because you only hear someone's music when you fight them as boss.
There was, yeah. That makes sense, yeah.
These songs had previously showed up in the fighting game, but the fighting game remixes were heard prior to the actual, like, shooter game ones. So that's kind of cool. There's one other thing that I wanted to touch on. That fourth stage, the Touhou main theme is the basis for that stage leading up to the fight against the protags, and it just rips. Yeah. It goes really, really hard. I could keep rambling about this, but there's a couple other things I'll talk about after we get through the music. But yeah,
I think we'll jump into the last block of music here. So these are all from Touhou 8. So we have Nostalgic Blood of the East, Old World, Retribution for the Eternal Night, Imperishable Night, Reimu Hakurei's theme, Maiden's Capriccio, Dream Battle, Marissa Kirasame's theme, Love Colored Master Spark, Cinderella Cage, Kagome-Kagome, Aaron Yagokoro's theme, Gensokyo Millennium, History of the Moon, Kaguya Hurasane's theme, Horaisons? Jesus, some of these names.
Horasan?
Horasan. Yeah. Okay. Flight of the Bamboo Cutter, Lunatic Princess. And then last track is Aaron and Kaguya's last spell theme, Voyage 1970. Yeah. Yeah, no, I was really, really impressed with all those tunes. Like they were just like not just the increased sort of complexity of the competitions or compositions and like the increased quality of the samples and things like that, but like just he's playing with the sort of form of music a lot more. Like you know, the tempo changes and things like that were a lot more interesting, I think, than they have been before. And you know, we sort of talked in one of the breaks about how he how the fights and the stages are sort of timed to the music to a degree. Um, so I feel like that must make for some very interesting stage dynamics as well, if you're sort of having to account for those.
It does when the
sort of
tempo
changes and you know, obviously like time signature changes and stuff as well. But you know, those are in the previous games, but I don't think he played with tempo quite as much in the previous games as this one.
No, he did not. And there's a lot of cool moments in the stages where the background scrolling will change speeds based, you know, relative to the tempo of the song, or like background transitions, because he's now gotten the engine to the point where he can change graphically, what's like do some mild 3D graphics in the background. And for example, one thing that happens is when you're going through a corridor, it starts doing a twisty thing, kind of like the first adult dungeon in Ocarina of Time.
Oh,
and
cool.
yeah, and
that.
It's just and it's all happening in the background, and it doesn't have an impact on gameplay, but it just looks super neat. So yeah, and visually, like the enemies, the sprite work in this one is very on point. His sprite work, especially for rank and file enemies in Touhou 8, feels like it's a step up from 6 and 7. They just look good. There's a recurring enemy that is a kind of a wisp inside of a magic circle that doesn't sound that elaborate, but it's just an incredibly cool looking enemy.
Yeah.
And it's just this little flickering flame inside of a red circle, and it somehow manages to make it look really, really neat. I do want to issue a little correction on myself. Reimu's theme did appear in one of the PC98 games. Marissa had a theme. I think it was the fourth one. Marissa had a theme as well, but she got a new theme for this game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, back from Touhou 4 days. So.
Okay, so this is a repeating theme. Where the other
this
one
is
wasn't. Okay.
So that's Reimu's theme came over from the PC98s, but Marissa got a new one.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, overall, the soundtrack is just. It is definitely the peak of this era of the Touhou games, because I think that 6, 7, and 8 can very fairly be taken as a trilogy.
Yeah.
And 10 is not a reboot, like 6 was, lore wise or gameplay wise. But these three taken together do form a kind of a cohesive whole. From a character continuity standpoint, and part of that's just because it's all in the same engine. There was a 9th game, which is probably not going to get touched on, but it is a versus shooting game like Twinkle Star Sprites.
Oh, okay, interesting. So it's not an actual. It's not a standard bullet hell shooter. Okay.
It is not a standard bullet hell shooter. No, the only game I can compare it to is Twinkle Star Sprite. So if you know what that is, it's that, but Touhou. You spawn boss versions of yourself on your opponent's screen, etc. You drop garbage Tetris style. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so that's. Yeah, because that feels like something that would be just one of the side games rather than a main game.
Yeah, my understanding is that it was a stopgap while he was working on the new engine. So basically, he got to take 2 years to make the new engine and not have to rush a new game like he did with 6.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay,
because
who does he decide all the numbering? For these, or like Like
Yeah,
what
so
determines all this stuff? Because there's so many Touhou games that are just like nothing to do with these. Like there's those 3D battle, the arena battlers and stuff like that that I've seen that obviously are not made by Jun. So
Mhm.
I was always curious, sort of what becomes quote unquote official. And is it just because like there's the games, the fighting games are like 7.5 and 11.5. So like they get to sort of be included as part of the numbering, but not
Yeah,
entirely.
so here's what's up with that. The games where Zune is involved in a directorial role are the ones that have numbers. They are the ones that are, quote, official,
Yeah,
meaning non-Dojin Touhou games.
yeah,
Like I know Touhou itself is Dojin, but I mean Dojin in like
yeah.
the
Dojin of a Dojin, like
yes, exactly.
yeah,
And so like even though this is a Comiket original, it has become it is its own series. It does its own thing.
yeah.
And so, for example, the first fighting game is called 7.5 because it came out after 7 and is nominally a continuation, not necessarily of the plot, but of the stories of the characters from 7 and previously.
Okay.
The second fighting game came out after 12.5, 11.5, somewhere in there.
I forget.
I think it's 12.5, yeah. And it encompasses this like continuing stories of characters from the previous few games, and then also these ones like from the older games. And those are the ones that he worked on in a directorial role. There was a shooting type spinoff game where you play a Cerno that I want to say was Touhou 12.9, leaning into a meme. And so basically anything that Zune directly has his hands in is going to be a numbered something.
Okay.
And if it is a side game, the ones that are like integer numbers. God.
Yeah, there's a few of those I've noted. I'm just looking at them here. Yeah.
Each one of those is dealing with a new story in the traditional format. So
Okay.
even the 9, right, the versus one, there is a plot there. There is a new final boss, and a whole bunch of returning characters. But there's an incident. There's a build up and a resolution to that incident, and there is a single player mode that has all the dialogue, but the gameplay is the versus kind of thing. So it plays a little differently, but it's still a shooting game, and it does what it's supposed to do, and it has all the Touhou things. And 9 is an aberration. There's been another one of those made since in the more recent games, like 17 or 16 or 17, maybe 18. But I don't know. 9 was kind of an experiment, it felt like. Yeah. And then 10 was back to basics.
Okay.
Kind of gave him another mechanical reset opportunity.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's trying to think if there's anything else that's like really, really important to mention. Oh yeah. A couple things here. So we talked about memes that broke containment.
Yeah.
One thing that I do want to mention. This goes back to Touhou 7. I'd forgotten about this when I was talking about it earlier. The guy that wound up being the Pop Team Epic guy really got his start drawing funny pictures of characters from Touhou for Twitter.
Oh.
And
that makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that just kind of continued on, and here he is now. But yeah, other than that, like, listen, Touhou, like any fandom, is kind of what you make of it, right?
Yeah.
There is bottomless fan fiction. There is endless lore. But if you want to take it for what it is, period. It is just some bullet hell shooters that place an emphasis on being very pretty, not necessarily graphic fidelity, but like having very pretty patterns and on being relatively approachable. It is a difficult genre, but it's an easier series in a difficult genre.
Yeah.
And just play on easy. You know, if you want to play and play on easy.
Yeah, like, you know,
nobody's going to judge you.
Care. Yeah.
They're also, you know, if you have an SO or a buddy that likes to go on, likes to enjoy chemicals, they'll have a blast sitting on the couch with you. Because these games love throwing up really pretty moving pictures. It's not a Schmongle video, but we're getting close.
Yeah, I used to do that with Res. I would just play Res while my friends who were otherwise chemically altered would just sit and watch.
Perfect.
So I imagine, you get a similar effect with this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it was great to have you on. Thanks so much for sort of joining on such short notice and genuinely having so much to say about this series, because like I was a little bit worried. I was like, oh God, are we going to be able to fill 2 hours on this? But,
easily.
Yeah, easily, apparently. So I don't know if you have anything you want to plug or anything you got going on.
No, anyone that needs to know me, I'm in the Discord. I use the same name. You know, I use Thuly in the Discord, and you can holler at me there. If you really need to dox me, you can probably use that name and figure it out. But hey, you know, act responsibly.
As for ourselves, Linktree is in the description. You can find our Patreon there, link to the Discord. I'll put a link to Reese's GoFundMe because she's still mid-move. She's currently on a 70-hour train journey as we're recording this.
Fair travels.
So hopefully by the time this episode is out, things will be sort of more back to normal with our schedules. So we'll be back to recording as normal. Thanks so much for joining me, and thank you everyone for listening. The last track we have, where did my notes go? It's the credits theme of Imperishable Night, which is a remix of the credits theme from Touhou 3. So that's called Eternal Dream Mystic Maple. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.